Welcome to Color for Digital Design, Session 8. We're talking about human color response, color psychology, and about setting up color schemes that are going to be effective for the purpose and the intended audience of your design and illustration and photography. I'm Alvalyn Lundgren. So first let's talk about color psychology, which is human color response. And I want to set this up by giving you an understanding about how people in general globally respond to color. And there's a variety of ways that we do that. There are individual responses. There are collective responses. Individual responses are those things that are personal. Collective responses are group responses. All human beings respond to color in a certain way. Then certain subgroups of human beings, like adults versus children, respond collectively or as a group to certain color stimuli. There are affective responses, which are psychologically or biologically based, how we are affected by color. And associative responses are those things which are learned. They are individual, but they're also group related. We also respond on the basis of light quality. Colors can look really good under certain lighting conditions and really bad under other lighting conditions. So our response is based very much on the quality of light under which we're seeing the color. And another factor in color response is our age. Our vision capabilities change as we age, and therefore things that we responded to well as children are not things we're necessarily going to respond well to as mature adults. Another thing to note is that when we're looking at specific colors and how people respond to them, the same color can have both positive and negative, upside and downside connotations. And it depends upon the situation the color is being used in. So the first factor in our human color response in color psychology is what we call inherited. This is an inherent response. It is psychobiologically based, and it basically deals with the fact that certain colors have influence on our pituitary. Certain colors will stimulate, certain colors will irritate, certain colors will calm. Inherited responses to color are affective responses. It's about how color affects us as human beings. An associative response is the learned response out of your own personal experience. There's certain colors you like because of something, certain colors you don't like because of something. So the learned response is based on your own life experience. Then there's a geographic or environmental response. And this is based pretty much on the physical environment. Do you have an affinity for colors of the Southwest, such as here in the Grand Canyon, or do you prefer colors in the environment that are in the Pacific Northwest? You will have a preference for colors based on geography that you like and a lack of preference for colors based on geography that you don't enjoy. Then regional response is more of a cultural or locale response. It is more architecture, it is more general attitude of people in a particular area. There's a very different vibe in Los Angeles than there is in New York City or in Boston. If you go to Seattle, there's a very different vibe in terms of fashion and how color is used just in a human culture sense, an anthropological sense, than if you are in Nashville, Tennessee. Another inherent response is that color makes up for climate. You can somewhat compensate for temperature and climate zones by color. So here we have a street in a smaller town in the state of Washington in winter, and you can see that the buildings are all rich or fairly bright in color. It actually lends a colorful vibe to the landscape. Often, especially where there are extremes in temperature, you are going to have brighter colored architecture, at least on the outside of buildings, and very often in the interiors, to make up for lack of light and colder climates. Another learned response is the idea of income or economic status. So for instance, if you can afford a Bentley, there are standard colors that the Bentley comes in. If you want something that's a really vivid, bright green, you'll more easily find that on a VW Beetle than you will on a Bentley, unless you want a custom paint job on the car. So certain colors are used to create a sense of elegance and exclusivity and denotes higher income levels. Maturity is based on your age, your education, your life experience, how much you know, how worldly you are. You'll have a greater appreciation for more subtle color, different types of color relationships, the more you've experienced them. So a person's level of maturity, their age, their life experience is going to have a factor into how they respond to color. Another thing to consider when working with color is the concept of synesthesia. And synesthesia is the idea that given any external stimuli, all of your senses will react at the same time. Say we're looking at the color orange. Well, we're looking at that visually, but we might also be aware of orange being a warm color, so there's a physical temperature issue that we overlay onto that. We might also think of orange in regard to either the fruit, or maybe it's a certain place or a particular sports team. All our experience and all our senses respond to stimuli, whether they're visual or auditory or tactile. So the main thing you need to know about synesthesia is that in everybody, all five senses respond together to whatever stimuli is in front of you. Some senses will dominate over others depending upon the stimuli. In extreme situations, synesthesia is a disorder. And synesthetes will see certain colors given certain situations, or they'll associate colors with numbers or colors with words that are not the color name, or they'll associate colors with emotions. The study of color involves the scientific or optical understanding how color works, why we see it, how it interacts with itself. It involves human color response, the psychobiological understanding, and it also involves communication, messaging, and meaning. In other words, symbolism. So, every culture, as a general rule, has color traditions within it. And to denote certain things, certain colors are used. Among cultures, certain colors have a common understanding, and certain colors are seen as just the opposite. So looking at a few hues and how certain cultures use those hues to communicate ideas and principles within their culture, we can see some of these commonalities and also differences. So, for instance, red in Asian culture is about happiness and prosperity, whereas in the Judeo-Christian Western understanding, it's more about courage and it denotes life. In Islamic culture, red is inspiring. It does relate to blood and life force, but it also relates to passion. And it's similar in Indian culture where it relates to sensuality. It is used in marriage celebrations and it connotes energy. So let's take a trip around the 12-hue circle and look at associative and affective responses for the 12 hues. And these are based on Western culture more than anything. So let's begin with yellow. And yellow is a color that irritates. It requires us to go through some very complex visual processing because of its force. It is a very light and at the same time very saturated or bright color in pigment, it glares. It's almost like, especially if we use yellow on white, there is a sense of a lot of light coming off the surface, and it's almost like we need to wear sunglasses to look at it. It's a very dynamic and advancing color, meaning that it has a forward motion toward us that is independent of how that color is used. And in terms of our pituitary, in terms of the psychobiological action, it's a color that irritates. So it's not a color that you want to use in certain environmental situations where you want a calm atmosphere. We use yellow to communicate the idea of speed and affordability, which is one of the reasons it's a category brand color for fast food. It's associated with sunshine. It's considered a cheerful color, although it irritates. We use it to communicate caution or give people a warning. So in our highway signage system, yellow is used for yield. It's used for school buses. It also attracts attention. And we associate yellow, of course, with gold. Gold is a color that sits within the yellow family. And then there's yellow-green. And of course, yellow-green has the addition of blue. So it is a compound hue. And it also irritates a little bit, but not to the extent of yellow, because it's also blended with blue. It does advance because of the yellow, but not as far as yellow advances because of the blue that's in it. In Western culture, we associate yellow-green with things that are trendy and artsy. There's a certain energy to it. There's a certain youthfulness to it. We associate it with sour food, such as limes, acid, and things that are inexpensive. Green adds even more blue into the mix. Green is actually a very stabilizing and static color. It sits mid-ground dynamically. It does not advance and it does not recede away from us. It is probably the most easy to process color that there is visually. It's easy on the eyes. Green environments aid our ability to concentrate. So they're a good background color. They also give us a sense of stability. So they're good for environments for people who have to relocate a lot. We associate green with things being fresh, with growth, especially plant growth, things that are healthy, organic foods. The brand category of organic, non-GMO type foods is green. We associate it with sustainability and environmental concerns. We associate it with nature. We also associate it with money, in the United States especially, because our money is green. It's an earthy color, but it's not necessarily an earth tone. We also associate it with safety and in the outdoors. Blue-green is a very narrow bandwidth between green and blue. Its popularity comes and goes. As of the recording of this video, it's on an uptrend. Blue-green, like green, is also stable. It does have a mid-ground dynamic, but it's more noticeable than green from a distance. We associate blue-green with prestige and elegance, definitely with personal care products for both men and women. We consider it refreshing, expensive, especially if we go toward the shades like teal. Tropical climates, the ocean. The ocean is not fresh water, it's salt water. It appears more blue-green than it does blue. And blue-green is also considered feminine rather than masculine. Blue, of course, is a primary hue. It acts on our pituitary to calm us. It has a mid-ground dynamic that is stable like green. Blue light retards healing and growth. Consider that when you're working on the computer and you have a blue background screen, a blue desktop. Blue light is not good for our eyesight. Blue reduces the appetite. Blue also compensates for hot temperatures. We associate blue with fresh water. Blue has a sense of depth to it, so it's like a surface and then you can break the surface and go underneath. We associate it in Western culture with trust and loyalty. It is an introvert's color. We associate it with intellect and study. It's also associated with electronics. Blue is understood as mainly masculine in terms of gender preference. We associate it also with the sky. Blue, by the way, is everyone's most favorite color worldwide. If you ask people what their favorite color is, blue is the number one answer. Green follows second after that, and then we get into red. Violet, blue violet, and red violet are the purples. And we lump them together because people generally lump them together and call them all purple, although they are different hues. So we'll look at them as a group. When you think about violet, it is a combination of red and blue. And on the white light spectrum, red is on one end, really long wavelengths, and blue is on the other with short wavelengths. So within violet, blue violet, and red violet, you have light reflecting that's very long in wavelength and very short in wavelength. That gives it a unstable understanding visually. It's hard to land anything that's violet, blue violet, or red violet. In fact, red violet does not exist in light. We have the idea of blue violet, there's no red violet. But we do obviously have red violet in pigment. If you look at the skin of an eggplant, if you look at a red onion, certain flowers are red violet in color. So it does exist in nature, but the fact that you're dealing with very long wavelengths and very short wavelengths mixing together gives it a little bit of instability in terms of our ability to focus on it. There is no biological action from violet. It does not stimulate the pituitary. It does not calm the pituitary. That's because the red and the blue cancel each other out. Associatively, in Western culture, violet is all about wealth. Historically, people who wore violet were people who had a lot of money because the dyes were so expensive. Violet's also associated with opulence and extravagance, which is kind of spending money for spending's sake. Certain power and authority. Violet is definitely a status color. It's more feminine than masculine in understanding. It relates to being creative. It relates to sensuality in Western culture. It's also related to fantasy, magic, and mysticism. We consider it a fragrant color. That's kind of one of those synesthetic understandings. Violet is sweet, especially the lighter violets like lilac. Dark violets, shades, are depressing and create kind of a sense of melancholy. Red increases your appetite. The pituitary is stimulated by red to secrete chemicals that increase your appetite, boost your metabolism, that increase your blood pressure and your respiration. So there is a strong physiological, biological action by red on the human body. Red light promotes growth. That's why when you're growing plants indoors, you put red lights around the room. Dynamically, it is the color we see first. It does have the longest wavelengths, so it advances very quickly. That's why stop signs are red. That's why we have red signal lights in intersections. That's why many of our emergency vehicles are red. We associate red with blood, obviously, with sensuality and passion. Passion, whether it is love or anger or rage, extreme emotion is what red connotes. In Western culture, it's also a color of courage. It's also a color to denote danger. It's a romantic color if it's tinted. Fully saturated and slightly shaded, it connotes female power, and it's a very active color. Red-orange is very similar to red, but it has more yellow in it. It is the warmest hue. Red-orange increases our oxygen levels. It's an invigorating color. It increases our blood pressure. We associate orange with a certain power and strength. It's an informal, affordable color. We associate it with autumn, tropics. It's a saturated, earthy color, and we also associate it with fruit. Yellow-orange is also, because of the presence of red, similar to orange. It does not energize as much as orange does because it has a lot more yellow in it. But it's a friendly color. It's a youthful color. It's casual. We associate it with citrus fruits. There's a sense of it being juicy. We think of it as a warm glow as opposed to heat. There's a lot of ways in Western culture we use yellow-orange in design. So moving away from the outside of the hue circle and crossing toward the center, let's look at browns and earth tones. Browns do not create any biological action, and they have a mid-ground dynamic, so they don't really advance or recede. They're very similar to green, which is also associated with earth. Browns are friendly, they're approachable, they're considered classic. Darker browns are high-end, higher income. Lighter browns are casual. Brown is generally masculine. It's a very comfortable, comforting color. It is neutral, allowing other colors to be highlighted. Black recedes. It always has a background dynamic wherever it's used. The only place it doesn't have a background dynamic is on white or on yellow. We associate black with things that have a lot of weight and density to them. Black is the ultimate authority, power color. In Western culture, judges wear black, ministers wear black. You wear black when you graduate with a doctorate or a master's degree. It is a color of respect. It's a very formal, elegant color. It can also be a very threatening color, depending upon how it's used and how it's worn. It's related to ideas of mystery and evil, and it's a very somber color. It's serious. White, the opposite of black, encourages precision, it encourages cleanliness. We associate white with purity and sterility in terms of things being ultra clean, germ-free, fragrance-free, in a sense, reliable. We associate it with innocence. Certain professions wear white. Tennis players, house painters, I don't know why house painters, but house painters usually wear white. Then the medical profession traditionally has always worn a white coat or white uniform of some sort, so white is very often sort of a professional category uniform color. We associate white with snow, with cleanliness. It is lightweight as opposed to black, which is visually heavy and dense. White's also used to denote generic products. Generally in graphic design, we start with a white artboard and build everything on top of that. So white is the background color for a majority of graphic environments. And white is refined and sophisticated, so it can be used to denote a higher end type of product. So that's it in a nutshell for going around the hue circle, hue by hue. When we are using design to market, to communicate ideas, to influence, to persuade, this kind of very basic knowledge is useful as a starting point. Remember that color schemes always depend upon what you're trying to say and who you're speaking to. So when you go to select color, you need to consider not just the geometric construction of the color scheme or what looks good together. You need to consider what purpose the color scheme is used for. Because the right color scheme with the wrong purpose is not going to work. You can have a really nice looking scheme, but if it doesn't serve the purpose that you're using it for, then it's the wrong scheme. So the first thing you need to do when dealing with color selection for a design project or an illustration is to define the message. What are you trying to say? What does the design need to do? And how will color help support the messaging? You also need to determine what voice the color needs to convey. Is it lightweight? Is it humorous? Is it exciting? Is it passive? Is it calm? Mood plays a big part in the kind of colors you select. You can take, say, a primary triad, and that primary triad of red, yellow, blue can be used for kids' products. It can be used for Assassin's Creed packaging, for a very high-end, elegant steakhouse, for sports teams. It can be used for superheroes. The construction is only one aspect of color scheme selection. The construction gives you that balance between the primaries, making sure that your color scheme is going to be harmonious within whatever environment you're placing it in. That's only the starting point. So you've got the message and you've got the mood or the voice of the design involved in selecting color. You want to look for 2, 3, 4, maybe 6 dominant colors that are going to do the hard labor, carry the load of communicating the character and the message that you're trying to convey. Then you add accent colors in a supporting role. So a color scheme that, say, is a tetrad can have colors from all around the hue circle involved in it, but there will be a dominant color scheme that goes on. The other colors are accents or just there to support the main idea. Or you can just select the dominant colors and not include supporting characters depending upon what you're trying to do. Then you want to make sure that you are reaching the audience. You cannot design for everybody. Businesses and organizations will be targeting specific audiences both demographically and psychographically. So color schemes need to reach not just the demographic but the psychographic. The demographic is more about age and income level and general interests. Psychographics is more, will they buy, will they find this relevant, will they fit this into their lifestyle, will they become loyal customers or clients. So you need to understand who the audience is that's receiving the design and what they're supposed to do once they receive it. How are they supposed to respond? Color selection is very much an influencing factor in how people respond to things. And then you want to research on the competition. Researching competitors is always a good idea because it just broadens your knowledge and your understanding. You learn from competitors. You learn on behalf of your clients for your clients' competitors, or on behalf of your employer from your employer's competitors. And everybody uses color for marketing and communication purposes. So it's a good idea to know what they're doing. You don't want to be too similar, and you don't want to be so far out of bounds that your color scheme selections don't make sense. If your client or employer fits within a brand category such as cola drinks, men's hygiene products, fast food, there is going to be what's known as brand category color, which are an expected set of colors that the brands within that category pretty much use. And these would be dominant colors. So if you look at In-N-Out Burger, Five Guys, McDonald's, Jack in the Box, Burger King, they all have these standard red and yellow colors. These colors identify this category as fast food, burgers, and fries, as opposed to something like Chipotle or Baja Fresh. In conclusion, if you're going to establish a visual message and create a call to action that the target audience is going to respond to, color schemes need to contain clues that will trigger the hoped-for responses. So you cannot be too far out of line with your color schemes. There's only so much innovation that you can go pushing the boundaries, but how much innovation color-wise can you do within the boundaries? That's where real color creativity can start to happen within those boundaries. And your color schemes also have to address the purpose of the product or service that you're designing for. And lastly, they have to be relevant to the audience and market that you're trying to reach.